This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Today's talk focuses on Elon's Equilibrium challenge, as well as Tesla's expected very strong day today in the markets. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. This trade blast is focused primarily on our Patreon supporters. We want to thank you for your support. If you enjoy, please take time to at least hit us with a like. It would be greatly appreciated. Comments also appreciated. So the first item is that we're in the second day of the 3-day rule right now. Usually when we get started on a 3-day rule, be it up or down, it takes a couple of days for all the buyers to execute all of their trades. And so we kind of anticipate this being kind of in the second day of that period. And the strongest days tend to be days 1 and 2 in the 3-day process. But, you know, my hope is that we actually get a short squeeze today. So hopefully we could end up having the 3-day rule hit with more force and last longer as a result. So we will, keep an eye out and update. I hope you guys made some money in pre-markets because obviously the stock was up and we're seeing a nice sort of upward trend with the help of the broader market. So if there's any day that you need to make hay while the sun is shining, today would be that day. So the next thing I wanted to review is, so basically, it's smelling like 800, 820 today possibly. We're hopeful that it might be more, but if we could get just a little bit more move than expected, I think we might be able to sort of catch the short seller wave of having to buy out before it goes very, very high. One other piece of news that kind of popped up, I think we sent you some notes on this, is that there's a lot of suggestions that the Gigafactory in Fremont will reopen on Friday. And if that's the case, I think it ends up being huge for the stock and could really give us a nice boost beyond what we've already enjoyed. So we'll look forward to sort of following up with you on that. The next item I wanted to review is something in the market that's called, it's sort of a 3-day rule that's sort of outside of earnings that we're dealing with right now. So as you may recall, Mr. Einhorn made comments regarding faulty accounting by Tesla. And so as he issued that tweet, you notice that the stock price fell. And now it has recovered from both Elon's comment and that tweet because one, of the 3-day rule, we have the institutions that are making their move to articulate what they think of the numbers that Tesla produced and its potential for growth and success for the rest of the year. So what we kind of have going on right now is a situation where sort of Elon raised his issues, the analysts kind of don't agree with him, otherwise the stock price would still be down. Mr. Einhorn made his allegations, but there are some really expensive and good accountants out there, and they've been engaged to figure out whether or not his allegations were valid. And again, the stock price location is an illustration of the fact that those very high-priced accounting, including the accounting firm that deals with Tesla's materials, doesn't agree with Mr. Einhorn, hence we have a higher stock price. So the next question is kind of what's next, and the answer is that we're expecting to see much better movement of the stock for the next couple of days, at least today, possibly and tomorrow before we started getting into Friday pinning action, for the reasons we always discuss. So again, congrats to those of you who made money. Congrats to those of you who are writing out some nice calls right now, making some cash in the process. And we look forward to a follow through on that today. So make as much as you can because we don't always get days like this. The next item that I wanted to cover is a concept I call equilibrium challenges for Elon, which was our primary show topic today. So what is this about? Excellent question. Glad you asked. So I read a really strange article. This is probably 10 years ago, might have been more. And it was about a gentleman who was a member of a famous rock band. And what he pointed out is that there's a really weird thing that happens in Los Angeles, California, and other places, obviously, where you have all of these people who've started out with very little or nothing, became musicians, were successful at it, and he would go to these parties at homes, very expensive homes, where he'd walk in the door, and the main table, coffee table, would just be a giant stack of cocaine and other drugs. And so he coined a term that I thought was really interesting, where he was saying that most of the musicians, many of them the biggest ones, came from sort of humble beginnings, and they'd never seen the kind of money that they were enjoying. So what they tended to do was that they were trying to find a way to get back to what he called their equilibrium. So one way you could get there is if you do a giant pile of very expensive drugs and share it with your friends, you all of a sudden just wasted so much money that you have a slight decline in your bank account, and therefore getting you towards your sense of equilibrium, i.e. very low cash in your bank account based on the fact you just snorted a bunch of it. Obviously enjoyable. But I just thought that was amazing. I was like, wow, that's a strange phenomenon. I then read there's a sociological study that suggests that for most people, your sense of wealth is the equivalent of what your household wealth was when you were 18 years old, somewhere between 17 and 19. So in essence, for all of us, our sense of equilibrium kind of lies right around how much wealth did your family have? You had a house, maybe a car or two, or your parents were making X amount. So that is your sense of equilibrium. And so for people like Elon that end up eclipsing that number by huge quantities as he has, an interesting problem pops up, which is you now have all this wealth, and kind of what do you do with it? And the answer is you could try to find creative ways to get back to your sense of equilibrium. And so I thought it was, I've heard the story, then I read the sociological piece. I tried to dig it up so you guys could read it because I didn't think you'd believe that it existed. But I was just fascinated by the fact that Elon is kind of living through this. Another Elon phenomenon I've noticed, and it kind of plays out well for Tesla, is that he kind of lives something that's called the 80-20 rule, which suggests that if you're in business, if 20% of what your company is doing is not a failure, then you're not exposing yourself to risk enough to gain the opportunities that might come out of that 20% experiment that you were doing. So hence, one of the challenges for Elon/Tesla is as Elon lives this rule, it can really be hard on the company, but in some cases ends up being a huge success that's good for the company. One thought that comes to mind is that I read several articles by Tesla employees about the door handles for the Model S in particular that protrude or extrude from the vehicle as you come up to it. And basically everything was working fine, the car was looking good, and all of a sudden Elon came up with this, and that they had to engineer it into the vehicle. And they did so upon his request. But the other problem that popped up is that, guess what the number one warranty repair item for Tesla vehicles is? Those door handles. And so you have other problems of cold climate where they freeze and you have to chip off the ice, and all kinds of problems have emerged from it. But it's turned out to be a very expensive part for the company. But it does look cool, but after you use it a few times, I think that the coolness factor wears off, especially if your door handles freeze and you can't get in the car. So I think it's great that they re-engineered to what the Model 3 operates with and doesn't deal with that issue. It keeps even in Model 3, it keeps the aerodynamics down for that, for airflow, but it can be a little bit difficult to sort of slip in there. I couldn't imagine being a woman with long nails and having to open up the car door, for a Model 3 with those. So basically, we're kind of roaming in the world where the power of business is kind of shifting from the Midwest or the East Coast out to the West Coast. And one of the problems the West Coast has is how do we get you to modify your behavior, and can we deliver enough feature differentiation to facilitate your changing your current habits? And so that's the answer, is using the 80-20 rule. You're redefining new products in that 20% quadrant, or new improvements to products that keep an edge to the whole thing. And if anybody defines edge, it's Elon, in terms of finding the edge, living on the edge, and really sort of savoring every bit of creativity it takes to live out there successfully. So, in essence, I would say that this is a real challenge, because as you're living in that manner, you sort of drag family, company, everybody with you, and it's sort of what you become comfortable with. And it's funny because as I was preparing for this show, I've been having a good laugh. I don't get it as much anymore, but basically for the last 2 years, I would at least once or twice a month get a note from someone in our comment section that would say, why don't you just do the same topics as everybody else, rather than doing different angles on different topics, for example, like today's. And I thought that was funny, because when you're a smaller channel, if you actually present the exact same information as all of the other suppliers, you get no views. So on one hand, you want to do the same thing, or show the new car color, or something obvious that the company has provided to the top level bloggers that you'll never get your hands on, or you'll get your hands on them way late. And therefore, there's no real material that differentiates you from competing entities. So as a result, you just don't get any views because you've already got that information from the other entities. So case in point, the 3-day rule. That's something we've sort of developed and introduced, and as you've seen today, it's actually playing out. So the reality is that if you do not innovate in this new world and continue to do so, it sort of nets you into a box where those innovations is what's driving your viability. And so I think it's fun to watch Elon relative to the Chinese situation, because they've worked hard to sort of refine and define new products that the world might want, but they do suffer the challenge of creativity challenges that result in them really having to copy or do other things, whereas you have sort of the wild, wild west of California, where there are a lot of people developing new ideas that become ubiquitous, and it's sort of a hotbed for creativity and new ideas to sort of be manifest. So I wanted to sort of run through this today, because part of being a Tesla owner, stock holder, vehicle owner, is really sort of riding the benefits of what the transition to electric provides and enjoying that, but at the same time recognizing that there are experiments that are being conducted to try to improve product offerings and services, and you're part of the experiment. So as the changes occur, some of the inputs you might have as well, et cetera, will impact what's being done and how the future looks. And all of us are kind of making small and large contributions to this effort. So you will see show items that we cover that nobody else does, and it actually has impacted how the company operates, because they actually record the show, download the transcript, and go through it to determine if there are items there that the company needs to address. And I've been pleasantly surprised to see some of the changes that fit the profile of what I just described. So, getting back to our main show topic, yes, Elon has an equilibrium challenge. That's why he's selling the houses. And a final note on it that I thought was funny is that the owners, Sergey Brin and his partner, Larry Page, are Stanford alums. And I thought it was interesting because there's a place maybe a block from Steve Jobs' house, and all of a sudden, maybe this is 10 years ago, at least maybe 15, all these houses were being bought in that neighborhood and refurbished. So at least like 7 houses like right next to each other. And we're talking, that's one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Palo Alto. The average house is about $5 million. So these houses were maybe 10 or $12 million homes that then got like $5 million rehabs after they were purchased. And so I just was like, what's going on here? And it turns out that Sergey and Larry decided they were going to buy 2 or 3 homes next to each other, ideally so they don't have neighbors, number one, but number two, those homes all became sort of guest homes or let the kids hang out with their friends' homes, and you live in your primary residence. So Elon, up until I guess a year ago, did a routine where anytime he would fly in from LA to work at Tesla, he would simply call up Sergey or Larry and say, can I stay at the house? And so they'd be like, yeah, sure, whatever. So that also gave him an opportunity to really just hang out and kick it with those guys when they had time for a meal, so they could kick ideas around that he might consider. Kind of one of the byproducts of this is, I believe it was Larry Page that said that he's so impressed by Elon that he would really consider leaving all his money to Elon so he could manifest the work that he had done with Tesla and SpaceX better. And Elon, when he heard that, I thought it was great to watch his face because he was pretty excited and impressed that he was regarded in that fashion. So Elon also, everybody's busy, obviously, in Silicon Valley, including the CEOs of some of the biggest companies in the world. But what was also interesting is that, as you may recall, the biohazard mode that's in both the Model S and the Model X actually came from, I believe, Sergey Brin saying to him, it'd be kind of cool to have that in the car. And so I believe Sergey's also on the board, and that's where the conversation might have come from. But when you're hanging around certain really smart people, sort of interesting ideas can bubble up that end up getting blended into your vehicle. So hence, I think that Elon being kind of restless and spending more time hanging out with people like the co-founders of Google and other people, less so sort of sequestered in giant mansions away from everybody, can have some bad sides, but also some good sides where he can really use the time and space to, stay hungry and stay creative. And we definitely get the sense that you kind of look at Tesla and it feels like a startup, even though it's a pretty big company, because there's really no effort to, sort of create this monolith to brilliance. More so, it's how can we get optimize performance. The one comment I will share that I think that I'd love to see the company consider is there's actually a giant parking lot that sits in front of the Fremont factory. And it's my belief that that parking lot needs to be sort of torn out and replaced by at least a 5-story, if not a 10-story parking lot with perhaps meal facilities or even a little hotel in there to facilitate international travel and workers being able to flow into and out of that space. Because one level of parking, when you have, 3 times the number of employees working in that building, I think is a waste. And I think it could become easily a profit center if there was something put in that building or that facility, dry cleaner. There are all these different things that people could use when they're pumping long hours, 12 hours a day in the building. It'd be nice to be able to walk out and have certain services that are waiting right there. In the case of Google, they make a point of putting food trucks in the parking lot and doing other things to facilitate ease for employees. I think Tesla could really do that and make a positive difference for employees as well as make some money off of it because they could easily market that facility for use in a lot of different ways if there's some kind of retail or hotel or whatever sort of blended into that complex. So I wanted to mention it as something to consider for the company, and we look forward to your comments. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss, German, au revoir, French, lehitro, Hebrew, choda hafez, Farsi. And in Jamaica, we say, enough respect, walk good man. Thanks for taking time out, a little bit longer than usual. I hope you make some good money today. Thanks for joining us.